My name is Gemma Stewart, and I am the CUSU Returning Officer for the CUSU and GU Elections 2016. We need the computer, please. Here with us today we have the candidate for Access and Funding Officer. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Erin Attridge, and I'm a third year education student at Homerton.
Just mute the computer. Yeah, great. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions for you today, Erin. But before I start, the voting times open. So let's start again. Hustings will take place on Monday at 7 o'clock in the Mill Lane Lecture Theatre Room 1, which is an opportunity to hear all candidates give a speech and then ask them questions. You can also submit questions to us live. I have Twitter, Facebook, a Google form, which should be linked in the bottom, and emails open. So if you want to send a question in, get in touch. Voting will open at midnight on the 1st of March and close at 7 p.m. on the 3rd. And there will also be 3 roadshows being held on the Sidgwick site for 2 days, on Tuesday and Wednesday, and at the Downing site on Thursday from 10:30 to 1 p.m. And that's another opportunity for you to come and ask questions to candidates should they be around in campaigning, but also a good opportunity to come and vote if you don't have the time to, because we'll have some tablets with us. So let's get started. Erin, on the points of your manifesto, what's your #1 priority?
I think my #1 priority is actually to continue what's already been put in place. I think, as well as access, what CUSU is very well known for is a shadowing scheme, and in the past few years that's increased. And I'd like to just continue that and make sure that students who benefit from it the most are being chosen.
Great. And what do you intend to do to support students from non-stereotypical backgrounds once they get into Cambridge?
So one of the things I've put on my manifesto is having a class discussion group. So we have really amazing liberation campaigns, but class is quite neglected in that. So I'd like to initially start with a discussion group where people can just voice their concerns, kind of feel that there are other people like them that they can talk to. And then on from that, maybe make it a proper affiliated campaign with CUSU.
Great. What's the most significant barrier to access, do you think, that exists in relation to the university?
I do actually think the Cambridge stereotype. So I do know that entrance assessments have been put in place. There are loads of things that disadvantage people in the application process, but I do think the biggest one is the stereotype, because that stops people from applying altogether. Mm-hmm. So basically, I have a lot of friends who are very talented, but just wouldn't apply here because they feel that there's not a place for them, and would apply to universities that have a different reputation.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you mentioned there was entrance exams. So I'm just going to ask you an off-the-cuff question. What's your perspective on the entrance exams that the university's just introduced?
Working to introduce. Yeah, I personally think that the uni are trying to make the best out of a bad situation. A lot of people are unaware of the fact that AS levels have been reformed, and that's what the entrance exam was brought in to compensate for. So I think yes, it's really bad. It will put people off. And one of my aims is to kind of reassure prospective students that it won't be that bad. There are already some courses that would have it anyway, and kind of give them really accurate information as to what would happen, especially because it is the first year. But I do think the uni are just doing what they can in terms of compensating for government changes.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about kind of more nationally thinking the current funding situation for higher education?
Okay, it's really messy, and as access officer, I feel I'm not too sure what I can do yet, and that's something I'd like the contribution of current students here in terms of what I could do. But I think it's ridiculous that grants have been cut, but that's constantly being justified by the fact that there's a bigger loan. So whatever I can do and whatever I can do with the student body to kind of work against that, I'd be really happy to do next year.
Great. You might have touched on it before, but what's the one thing that you most want to change about Cambridge University?
I think it probably is the class discussion group, because I think the kind of idea of access currently is it's about getting people into Cambridge, and I think there's a lot that can be done once people are here. So basically, giving a lot of my time and attention to current students from like non-traditional backgrounds, and kind of assuring that there's a place for them, a space for them to kind of talk about things that they feel aren't addressed.
Okay. What's been the biggest success of this year, and how would you try to improve it?
In terms of the CUSU access?
Yeah.
I think the alternative perspective, even though it's still pending, but like I looked at that website when I was applying, and it was very old, very outdated. It had students from like 1999 or something, and I think the fact that that's going to be redone will just help a lot of students because it's accessible no matter where you are. So I think that's one of the biggest achievements.
Okay, and how would you try to improve that?
By making sure it's currently being updated. So if there is a page for societies, making sure that that's like up to date. If any like sports team has a competition, that's put there. The diversity pages that are going to be made, making sure they're like updated and they're showing people like there are events that are put on, there are things happening within these groups.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the role of Access and Funding Officer with relation to graduate course admissions?
Okay, this is something I haven't looked up as much, but I think it'd be really interesting to kind of help people with postgraduate funding. I think there are so many talented students here who would like to go on to do a master's and further, but are put off by funding, especially because that's less available. And I know that there are loans available, but I think they have to be paid back within like a couple of years, and that's just not necessarily an option for everyone.
Okay. And one final question that I just thought of. So obviously we have recently had a referendum passed to introduce a disabled students officer. How do you foresee the Access and Funding Officer working with the DSO in the future?
Hopefully by having, not necessarily like, hopefully having like, oh sorry, my words are not coming out. But like,
if you want some time to
yeah,
think
I think I do, because I keep saying
that.
I think what I meant to say is like presentations. So there are loads of like target school presentations, and maybe one more accessible for people in terms of like visual impairments and stuff, but also saying like there is this additional help. Like I know people talk a lot about like the university counselling services, but obviously there are some disabilities that are more physical, and I think like representation and showing people that people like that are here through access means. And also more in general, not to do with access, but like, oh, it is to do with access, but like use of access statements. I think like people really appreciate those, and I think they should be used more wider in like university events online.
Okay. I'm just going to check if we've had any more questions submitted. I don't think that we have. I'm hoping that the stream has worked, but this has been very spooky.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of one more.
Yeah.
So obviously we've touched on the disabled students officer, but how would you work with other liberation groups that don't necessarily have a full-time officer on the CUSU team?
I think through supporting them just in everything they do, so like being an ally, whether you identify with those groups or not, supporting them in any access initiatives they may have. So I know that the BME hustings are coming up and they're having a BME access officer who I'd really like to work closely with. In terms of current students here, I know a lot of like women are interested in talking about like women and non-binary people in academia and like them going into higher education. So although I personally won't put in place a scheme for those individual groups, I will support them like wholeheartedly in whatever schemes they want to do.
Okay, thank you very much. With that in mind, we definitely haven't had any more questions submitted, unfortunately. But my suggestion is to anyone that's watched or will be watching later on in the evening or throughout the week, if you have any more questions for Erin, you can get in touch on a Facebook page. You can also get in touch by coming along to hustings, which again is at 7 o'clock in the Mill Lane Lecture Room 1. You can also come and find us at the roadshows. We'll have copies of all candidates' manifestos. And other than that, I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.